Good morning, afternoon, or evening. How y'all doing today? Welcome back to Mr. Morrell's Algebra 1 and 2 class. Today we're going to start talking about adding and subtracting integers, okay? And in order to really understand this, we have to realize that when you're adding integers or subtracting integers, you're really just adding them, okay? Whenever you're combining numbers as far as a sum or a difference, you're really adding them. You're either adding two positive units, or you're adding two negative units, or you're adding a positive and a negative unit. Okay, but it's always addition. All right. Let's talk about absolute value. I know we've spoken about it before, but let's go ahead and talk about it a little bit more. The absolute value, if you remember, is the distance from zero. Absolute value is always positive and is represented by the following symbol. Okay, it looks like a parallel sign. It's just two straight lines. And the absolute value is the distance from zero. Remember that the absolute value, since it's the distance from zero, is always positive. The absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5 as well, because it is 5 units away from zero. Okay. Now, there are rules, such as most things in math, for adding and subtracting integers. Rule number 1. Gentlemen, when the signs are the same, you simply add the values and keep the sign. When the signs are the same, you simply add the values and keep the same sign. It's literally that easy, gentlemen. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and look at what I'm talking about. I've got 4 plus 7. Okay, so whenever I'm doing this, I quickly ask myself, what is the sign of each number? And the sign of 4, well, there's nothing in front of it, right? So that means it's positive. So I got a positive 4. What's the sign of 7? What's the sign of 7? It's positive. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. Done. What's the sign of, now for B, what's the sign of the 8? What's the sign of the 5? When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So that'd be negative 13. Think about going to the beach, okay? Everyone has dug a hole in the sand, okay? The hole in the sand is a negative. The pile of sand is a positive. If I see 8 holes in the sand, and then I see another 5 holes in the sand, haven't I seen a total of 13 holes in the sand? That's how positives and negatives work. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. Now, what's the sign of the 2 here for C? Now, here's the tricky part. What's the sign of the 7? No, it's also negative. Let me explain this. What this really means is negative 2 plus a negative 7. Remember what I said when I first started the lesson today. We're always adding. You're either adding positive units or negative units. So even though I have negative 2 minus 7, it's really negative 2 plus a negative 7. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign, and that would be negative 9, my brothers. 8 plus 19, signs are the same, you add and keep the sign, so that would simply be positive 27. Negative 6 minus 12. The sign of the 6 is a negative. The sign of the 12 is a negative, right? This really is reading negative 6 plus a negative 12. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So that would be negative 18. So when the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. Does that make sense, gentlemen? Any questions, gentlemen? All righty, my brothers. Number 2. Rule 2. When the signs are different, okay, when they're different, when they're opposite, you're going to subtract as normal. Sometimes people don't realize what as normal means. When you're going to subtract as normal, that means you're going to take the small number from the large number. So you're going to subtract as normal. That's large number minus small number. And then you keep the sign of the largest absolute value. You know what the absolute value is? It's the distance from 0. So whenever you see opposite signs, you're going to, again, subtract as normal, large number minus small number, and you're going to keep the sign of the largest absolute value. For example, I have 8 minus 6. The sign of the 8 is positive. The sign of the 6 is negative, okay? You may say, no, 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 Moro. No, it's not. That's a minus sign. No, it's not. This is really saying to you 8 plus a negative 6. So 8 plus a negative 6 is 2. Positive 2. Remember, when the signs are opposite, you subtract as normal. So 8 minus 6, which is 2. And it keeps the sign of the largest absolute value. 8 is a larger absolute value than negative 6. So there's more positives than negatives. It's positive 2. 19 minus 27. Well, 19 is positive. 27 is negative. So I'm going to subtract as normal. 27 minus 19 is 8. But I have more negatives than positives. I have a larger absolute value for the negative 27. So I've got negative 8 as my answer. You subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. For C, negative 11 plus 5. Well, the signs are opposite. The 11 is negative. The 5 is positive. When the signs are opposite, you subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So this is going to be 11 minus 5, which equals 6. But I have more negatives than positives, so this is negative 6. Is everyone with me so far, my brothers? Thank you, gentlemen. D, 13 minus 30. Okay, so I have a positive 13 and I got a negative 30. When the signs are opposite, you're going to subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So 30, brothers, minus 13. Moro, why are you doing that again? Because I'm going to go large, which is 30, minus small, which is 13. 30 minus 13 is 17. Bless you. But my answer is negative 17. Why is it negative 17? Because I have more negatives than positives. I had a negative 30 and I had a positive 13. So if we were on the beach, there's more holes than sand. There's still more negatives, okay? Now, for E, next, negative 16 plus 10. Sign of the 16 is negative, sign of the 10 is positive. When the signs are opposite, you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So we're going to subtract as normal. 16 minus 10 is 6. Okay, so I got 6, but there's more negatives than positives, so my answer is negative 6, my brothers. Does that make sense, gentlemen? Questions on that, gentlemen? You promise? Okay, let's move on. Thank you, brothers. Now, special case, okay? The special case, it's not that special, but I want to make sure you understand this. When you are subtracting a negative number, think about that. When you're subtracting a negative number, you're taking a negative away from a negative. The two negatives multiply together, and it becomes addition. And then the rules always stay the same. But a lot of times people get confused when they see that negative and negative, okay? For example, negative 6 minus a negative 15. Whoa, what do we do here? You just chill, take a deep breath, and think about it. I've got a negative 6 here minus a negative 15. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive. So that's now negative 6 plus 15. Signs are opposite. Subtract as normal. Keep the sign of the largest absolute value. 15 minus 6 is 9. I saw you had a question, my brother. Does that make sense? No, there are no silly questions. Thank you, my man. Yes, sir.
Easy way for me to deal with it is I see the parentheses are two negatives, so I just cross the parentheses.
Correct. That's exactly right. A lot of people have actually been trained that way, and that's a great suggestion, so I'm going to use it. Thank you so much. What one of your fellow classmates was saying was, what I like to do is this, Mr. Morrow. I see it better for me. When I'm reading this, I say negative 6 minus a negative 15. Well, a negative and a negative is positive, so you could just go like this and make it a positive if that makes it easier for you. It's still going to be the same thing, 15 minus 6, and that's still going to be 9. And it'll be positive 9 because there's more positives than negatives now in this case. Whichever way works for you. I'm a creature of habit. I do little arrows. You want to do that, that's fine. A lot of my students do that. Thank you so much for bringing that up, sir. So here I've got 8 minus a negative 3. We're going to use my boy's method, so we can just make that a plus, right? So now I've got positive 8 and a positive 3. Signs are the same. You add and keep the sign. That'd be positive 11, gentlemen. I've got 12 minus a negative 9. Okay? We're going to use that method again. We see that negative times a negative. That's a positive. 12 plus 9 now is 21 because the signs are the same. You add and keep the sign. I've got negative 7 minus a negative 7. So I'm going to go ahead and create that positive here because a negative times a negative is a positive. And now I have negative 7 plus 7. Signs are opposite. So you subtract and keep the sign with the largest absolute value. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0, and 0 does not have a sign. How about for E? 14 minus a negative 4. Again, this is 14. Remember, these two become a positive, so plus 4, and that'd be 18. Remember, you could drop those arrows down like I did. I'm a creature of habit. But if this makes sense to you, you like it better, I have no problems. Just make sure that it's all crossed out. It all became a plus. Yes, sir, my brother. I know it's not negative. So 14 minus a negative 4, I created this. These two negatives here went bye-bye, and they became a plus. I know this is not 14 is not negative. 14 plus 4 is 18. Because when the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. Thank you so much, my man. Does that make sense, brothers? Okay, real quick, property. Very important property. Okay, a lot of people don't ever really pay attention to this as they're learning in pre-algebra and whatnot, but it's real important, guys. And it's the additive inverse property. And it basically states, for any non-zero number A, okay, non-zero, there is one real number, negative A, called the additive inverse or opposite of A, as described below. Basically what happens is this, gentlemen. A number plus its opposite is 0. So A plus negative A equals A minus A, which equals 0. Why do we need to know this? You're going to need to know this when we're working with equations. And this lets you know that positives cancel out negatives. Back to the beach. If I've got 2 holes in the ground, but next to those 2 holes in the ground, I got 2 piles of sand. Can't I just kick one of the piles into one of the holes, the other pile into the other hole, and now I've got no holes anymore? So in essence, didn't the pile of sand cancel out the hole? That's how negatives and positives work, brother. Just like, think of a little ice cube, okay? And then like a little fireball. The fireball will melt the ice cube, but the ice cube will put the fire out, right? And it'll evaporate and you got nothing. Kind of the same thing. A positive cancels out a negative of the same value. So A plus a negative A equals 0. So any number plus the opposite of that number is 0. So if my original real number is 12, what will my additive inverse be? Negative 12, yeah. And if my original number is 3/5, what will my additive inverse be? Yeah, that's exactly right. And if my original number is 2 3/8 or 19/8, what will my additive inverse be? Negative 19/8, very good. You can have a negative mixed number. If you wanted to write this as a negative mixed number, it would be negative 2 and 3/8, my brother. Yes, sir. The 2 and 3/8 converted to a 19/8. The additive inverse of that would be negative 19/8 or negative 2 and 3/8. Yes, sir. Well, to go from a mixed number to an improper fraction, 8 times 2 is 16. Then 16 plus 3 gives you the 19. Thank you, my man. Okay? I multiplied denominator to the whole number, and then I added that product to the numerator. Thank you, my man. Now, hold on, guys. I'm going to continue this video. Okay? Just a little bit left to go on to lunch. I'm going to continue. Watch it. Homework is valid. Thank you. God bless you. Hope you learned a lot. Have a great day. Okay. So now we're going to evaluate each expression using a calculator. Guys, this is not a big deal. I just want you to understand that there is a minus sign on a calculator and there is a negative sign. Okay? And there's a big difference. The negative sign is usually in parentheses, and it's used to determine a negative value. The minus sign is just subtracting two values. So on your calculator, hit the little negative sign with the parentheses, and it says negative, negative 8, now go minus 17. Now you know that the signs are the same, so you're going to add and keep the sign. So that's going to be negative 25. Okay, for number 2, just follow exactly what's written down. Don't be a hero. Follow your calculator the way it's written down. So the negative sign, not the minus sign, negative 8 plus 9 minus 12 minus 7 plus 6 will equal negative 12. 4,567 minus 8,971. You don't have to use the negative sign there. It is the minus sign. When you start with a negative, like in example number 4 here, okay, so like I was saying, guys, when you're starting with a negative, you're going to go ahead and use the negative sign in your calculator, not the minus sign. So this would be negative 5,216 plus 6,897, and that will equal a positive 1,681. It's positive because there are more positives than negatives. Okay? So now let's just go ahead and practice a few. Make sure we got this so you can do really well on your homework, quizzes, and tests and actually learn the subject. So I got 5 minus 12. The signs are opposite, so I'm going to subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So this will be negative 7 because 12 minus 5 is 7, and there's more negatives than positives. I got negative 12 minus a negative 5. Well, a negative times a negative here becomes a positive, so this is negative 12 plus 5, which becomes negative 7. You're going to subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. 14 minus 26, this is going to be negative 12. 26 minus 14 is 12, but I have more negatives than positives, so it's negative 12. When the signs are opposite, you subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. I've got negative 12 here, plus, right, that's a plus 4, minus 8, plus 15. Negative 12 plus 4 is negative 8, minus 8, plus 15. Negative 8 minus 8, when the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign, is negative 16, plus 15 is negative 1. Negative 8 minus a negative 3. Well, I've got negative 8. Remember, this negative times a negative is positive 3 now, and this will be negative 5. When the signs are opposite, you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. Then I've got 52 minus 18 minus a negative 22. Let's make that a plus because a negative times a negative is a positive. 52 minus 18 is 34. And it's positive because I have more positives than negatives. Plus 22, which is 56. Because when I am adding the same signs, I add and keep the sign. Hope that made a lot of sense. Hope you learned a lot. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye now.